Hey, everybody. So I'm here to represent the testosterone in the group. So what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about my wife. We were diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2016 at a time when we didn't know much about the disease, and we've learned a lot since then. When we discovered our diagnosis, we went home in shock, and we drank a little. And we decided the next day that we were going to proclaim to the world that we had Alzheimer's. When I say we both, even though my wife was diagnosed, we are struggling with this disease. And from that time, we decided to make it public because we grieve with all of you of those that have had the disease that hid from having it. And so to tell our story, I'd like to introduce you to the most courageous woman I know, Pamela Montana.
Wow, how do you follow that? I just want to say how excited I am and thankful I am to be here with all of you. This is actually the third year that we've attended this event, and every year it continues to get bigger and better. Thank you for being here and for helping us to find a cure. Maria and her amazing team at WHAM continue to impress me with their enthusiasm that generates the funding that we all so desperately need and want. In 2016, as Bob mentioned, my life, our life, turned upside down. Sorry, this part's always hard. After months of testing, and I mean months of testing, MRIs, PETs, and CT scans, I was finally diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. I was only 61 at the time, and getting the diagnosis, again, as Bob mentioned, rocked us and shattered my plans and my amazing career at Intel Corporation. Getting the diagnosis was extremely difficult, and even my primary doctor told me I didn't look like I had Alzheimer's. Well, I hate to tell you, but this is what Alzheimer's looks like, people. My husband Bob and I took some time to grieve, as he mentioned. Definitely had a few drinks that night. And then we got busy raising awareness, raising money, and using every social media platform available to us to remove the stigma and to share our story. We met Maria and Sandy a few months later at Part the Cloud, and we've been working with them ever since. I don't know where they are, but love you guys. We've been using our voices to help us fund research and to find a cure. I was thankfully able to participate in a clinical trial at UC San Francisco Memory and Aging Center, and I was very excited to be part of the cure. Without research, as you know, we will never find a cure. I was in the Roche Genentech clinical trial, looking at the amyloid in my brain. But sadly, 2 years later, the trial was stopped. It wasn't really working, I guess, clearly. I was devastated and, of course, cried about that too. I actually cry a lot now, as I mentioned. But thank God, a few months later, I was able to participate in a new trial that is looking at the tau versus the amyloid in my brain. I am so thankful for the funding that allows these trials to move forward. You and your support and donations are part of this, so thank you again. Without Maria and Move for Minds and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, we will never be able to find answers or potentially find a cure for this disease that, as you know, currently promises no cure or real treatment. So again, thank you, Maria. We thank you. Our kids and grandkids thank you. And we are so happy to be here to be part of the solution to end Alzheimer's. God bless you all.
give us a round of applause for these courageous. I think part of what we're trying to do is dispel the stigma of Alzheimer's, and so people like Bob and Pam standing up and telling their story and not being judged, but being met with applause and kindness and warmth and acceptance is a huge part of this movement. So I want to thank you for treating them the way they deserve to be treated. And I hope you will know that after we do this panel, they're going to be over here answering questions so that you can go up and talk to them. If you have any issues that you're noticing in friends and family, you can ask them about their journey. And I think it's super important, like with Bob, to know that there's a lot of men on this path being caregivers. More and more are stepping up, which is real joy to me. And I think it's really important that men like Bob step up, and both of them are serving with me on the California task force, where we're going to rock this country with that when we get finished. But anyway, I just want to take a second. We're going to have this panel, which is, once again, with the best doctors in the world, all of whom have flown in here to talk to you. When we finish the panel, they're going to do what we're calling doctor's hours. That means they're going to be here to answer your questions. So you can go up to them. We're not going to do questions. We're going to have this conversation, and then you can go up and ask them any questions you want. And all of them have years waiting lists, so take advantage of that. And then remember, downstairs is an entire wellness area. There's a bookstore with many of them who've written books. Their books, a marketplace, and all kinds of other things, caregiving information, stores, you name it. I just want to take a second and to ask, you've heard from Erin. Sandy Gleistein is here, who's the producer of this event. I just want to shout her out. Yeah. Erin and Sandy and Sam and Beverly and Mara and Carl and Richard and Hope and Elizabeth, all of these people over here have volunteered. They're friends, they're volunteered. There's the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. Stand up. Beverly, I don't know where you are. I want you to know they've been working really hard on making this bigger and bolder and better, and I want them to know how much I appreciate them. And if you get a chance to meet any of them, I hope you will tell them the same. Once again, Scott and Judy, thank you, and JJ for stepping up into this space, and to all the corporate teams, the corporate sponsors. It's a huge thing to have you involved in this issue. I can't stress that enough, because people ran from this issue when I got involved in it 16 years ago, and now finally they're coming to the table. So it means a lot to me that you're here. I called the head of Delta and said, look, I'm on your frickin' plane every week. You better show people. Okay, like, oh, you're Delta? Okay, I was like all over that guy. I hounded the head of Ed Bastian, who's the CEO, and he's like, I'm going to pick up this phone because you're really annoying. I said, yeah, I'm going to get more and more annoying. I'm on your plane all the time. You better send a team. So I hope you go back and say you had a good time. Anyway, but so, and the same with Starbucks. I'm like, don't make me go to Blue Bottle. So. Yeah, everywhere I go, I'm like, don't make me go someplace else. But anyway, let me bring up these incredible doctors, Roberta Brinton, all of whom we fund their studies. Dr. Roberta Brinton, Wendy Suzuki, Josh Grill, and Dr. Drew Ramsey. All of these people, and sit here, are extraordinary. They are extraordinary. I want you to see them because they are working on the front lines. They're working in labs, they're working in hospitals, and they're researching so that your future will be different. And I want to thank them all for making such a huge effort to be here today. Many of them came from far away, so I want to thank them. And I'm going to start with you, Robbie. Robbie was one of the first researchers I met in this space, and one of the first to really focus on women. And you actually, I'd like to just start with some exciting news that you just told me about standing there in the corner.
Well, thank you, Maria. As always, it's wonderful to be back at Move for Minds. So one of the studies that Move for Minds and Women Alzheimer's Movement has funded is a question that we really asked was, wait a minute, all these women are being treated with anti-estrogens for breast cancer. A therapeutic that blocks the estrogen receptor and blocks its ability to work. And we asked, wait a minute, that's going to be great for the breast, but what about for the other B organ, the brain? And we just completed a women's Alzheimer's movement study that shows that, amazingly, tamoxifen and emavistane both reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the brain. Right.
That is breaking news.
Breaking news. And why that's important is, and it harkens back to some earlier work that we did in a petri dish, and now we move that forward, looking and investigating in big data sets whether this was going to play out in the human brain, and it turns out that it does. And this is going to be very, very important because many women will unfortunately develop breast cancer and go on these therapies. And now we can communicate to physicians what therapeutic is great for the brain and great for the, wait a minute, breast.
Yeah.
And great for the brain.
The other thing you were telling me, Robbie, which I think is a question I get a lot, and I was down at NIH and pushing because of the Women's Health Initiative, there was a lot of confusion around women and hormones. And women felt that if they took hormones, they were going to get breast cancer, so they ran away from them. And yet everywhere I go, people are saying hormones are a neuroprotector for the brain, and you just are studying that as well from WHAM.
So many years ago, again, we began this program of research to really understand estrogen's role in the brain. Bottom line is estrogen is fantastic for the brain. It promotes the energy system of the brain and reduces the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And there was a study just recently published that is consistent with our findings, and we're very excited about it, that shows that women who started estrogen therapy at the time that they had symptoms of the perimenopause or the menopause, at the time they had symptoms, and continued estrogen therapy for many years, 10, 20 years, had the lowest risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, right? Yeah.
So that is huge, and I see you making a face. That is really, 99.9% of people do not know this.
Yeah, and so part of the kind of confusion is in the Women's Health Initiative study that came out, the negative effects that came out in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, on and on and on, was in women who were 65 years or older and did not have symptoms, right? Now, why did they do that? It's because they had 10 years of funding, and we knew that most individuals, both women and men, if they develop Alzheimer's disease, it's going to develop it in their 70s or their 80s. They had a 10-year window. So they started treatment of hormone therapy at the 65 years and older. So some people were in their 80s. Well, by that time, that system has shut down, right? That system has shut down. And the reality is that there were a couple of women, and when I say a couple, I mean a couple of women who actually developed Alzheimer's disease when they were on this hormone therapy, which was a combination of estrogens and a type of molecule that is hopefully not being prescribed any longer, medroxyprogesterone acetate. So I know this is a lot to kind of process after a long day of exercise.
Which is good for your brain.
Yeah. But the bottom line is that estrogen therapy is good for the brain when the brain is undergoing this perimenopause and menopausal transition, when there are symptoms. When there are not symptoms, the brain has changed. Menopause is like puberty. When you're done with menopause, you're cooked, you're baked, just like with puberty, right? You're different. And what that also means is that the brain is not responsive to estrogen at that point. So
Wendy, thank you so much, and that, as I said, she'll be here so you can ask questions. Wendy, I think so many people in this space are often discouraged by the news that they hear. This trial has failed, this trial has failed. I asked my doctor, they don't know anything. What excites you in this space today? What is the most hopeful thing you think you can convey to people who can go out from here and say, I learned X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. So the thing that excites me today, literally at this moment, having completed an amazing dance class, Elise Baker, are you here? Thank you very much. That was amazing. Is that physical aerobic exercise is the most transformative thing that you can do to literally protect your brain and stave off aging and Alzheimer's disease. It's not going to cure it. It's not the cure that, and it's true, it's depressing news that there isn't a good drug. But what exercise does is it builds up the one brain structure that I want you to remember from today. It's called the hippocampus. It's critical for long-term memory. And so what exercise does is it gives you brand new brain cells in that hippocampus. It makes it bigger and stronger. The hippocampus is that structure that where those plaques and tangles start first. So what you're doing with exercise, you're making it bigger and stronger. So it takes longer for those plaques and tangles to build up, and it gives you months, if not years more, because your hippocampus is nice and big and fat. And how many people want a nice, big, fat, fluffy hippocampus? I do. So that's what I'm excited about, because this is something that you can do today that we all did today together.
And there are other things you can do today,
Yes.
like, right? So Josh, and we've spoken a lot about it, you can look at the way you're eating, you can look at the way you're working, you can look at the way you're living, right? You can look at how educated you are about many of the things that these doctors are talking about. You can look at the way you're sleeping. So Josh, I think Josh and I just talked, Josh is down at UCI Irvine. And Josh, what excites you the most? What do you think as a researcher is the thing that gives you the most hope?
Thank you for having me back.
You're welcome.
A lot of things really excite me right now. I guess if I had to pick one, it's the promise of how much we've learned in the last decade. And that includes that we understand Alzheimer's disease is a very long process and probably begins a decade, if not two.
Yes, just keep talking.
A decade, if not two, before memory problems begin. And so
Pause a second, because that's kind of a headline, so I want you to pause. A decade or two before you're symptomatic. Okay? So that means if you're in your 40s, your 50s, your 30s, this is your disease. Go ahead.
I agree. And with this understanding and knowledge, it has showed us that there may be a window of time where we can intervene to try to catch people at the absolute earliest stages when their brain potential remains at its highest level and stave off the biological changes of the disease. So we're actually now doing very aggressive clinical trials of promising anti-plaque and anti-tangle therapies in people who we believe are in this window of time where the disease has begun, but the symptoms have not. And we think this may be the future of clinical care for Alzheimer's disease. Much like we take a statin to lower our cholesterol to prevent us from having a heart attack, maybe someday we'll be able to prescribe a drug to prevent someone from having a brain attack.
So how do you get people who don't feel they're symptomatic, are going about their day feeling, pretty good? They may be scared about Alzheimer's because everybody is, but how do you get them to think that they should be in a trial to help you that will help them? And they're 40.
Yeah, it's a daunting task, admittedly, but I'm really privileged to work with a lot of people at UC Irvine and around the country who've committed to joining us in this important effort. And the easiest thing for any person out there who wants to help to do is to join a registry. There are a number of national registries like the Brain Health Registry, the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry, and the APT Web Study, which is the Alzheimer's Prevention Trial Web Study. And joining in one of these things can connect you with places like USC and Arizona and UC Irvine and the like, where these trials are happening now, and more are coming. It is a very optimistic, enthusiastic time, and a time when we need all the help we can get.
So one of the things I try to say to companies is to let people have paid time off to participate in trials because it's a form of national service. If you're not going to join the military, as I said this morning, you're not going to join the Peace Corps or Teach for America or something, you can join a clinical trial and participate in this, and it really has incredible feedback and payback for younger generations and even for you. And you get, which I think most people don't realize, you get first-class medical care. Many people say to me, why should I join it? Like, you're not going to get this kind of care unless you join it. So that's a big asset to it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and also we're trying to develop preventions, and it's first in line for those therapies that we hope will someday be actual preventions for this disease. I think there are other benefits. You know, you're getting first-class care, you're getting access to experts, and we're monitoring people's health. And you know, as it is, sometimes we catch other things that would not have been caught as soon by nature of people participating in our studies.
So Drew Ramsey has written several books, has an ongoing practice about really also about what we eat. We talked a little bit here about exercise. We've talked about sleep. We're working with UCI Irvine about that. We've talked about hormones. Drew, you see a lot of men as well in your practice, and you've written a lot about food and the brain. What is your most hopeful piece of advice that people can take away about how to protect their brain and perhaps prevent a neurodegenerative disease?
I feel like I'm just supposed to say avocados. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm thrilled that we're talking about brain health because we're talking about mental health. And I'm thrilled to be alive right now in the last few years that we're talking about depression, anxiety, dementia, and we're just using those words. And we're empowering ourselves and our communities to think about what we can do, that we can move our bodies, that it's not necessarily some magic pill that we're looking for. We're gonna find that, and I can't wait for it. But until then, you're gonna have dinner tonight. You're gonna have breakfast tomorrow. If you're a family, you're gonna feed your kids. You're gonna feed your partner. And those are all moments that we can do something. Just do something a little better to take care of our brains. The hippocampus is not only affected by exercise. Very clear studies have shown over and over again that your risk of depression, how big your hippocampus is, it correlates directly with what you eat. Folks who eat a Western diet, the diet that we eat in America, they have a smaller brain and a smaller hippocampus as they age. People who eat a more traditional diet, more plants, more avocados, more wild fish, fatty fish, more nuts and beans, particularly nuts, more fermented foods. These all correlate with a bigger hippocampus. So I'm excited that there's
That's
something.
a kind of a headline, so just repeat that. People who have a Western diet.
People who have a Western diet, you double your risk of depression and you get a smaller brain. Not an opinion, just very clear science. And as we think about, right, what do we want? We want bigger brains. We focus so much on other parts of our body, making them tone and big and great, and that's nice, right? But the best thing about you is your brain, right? Nothing about your body really makes you sexy like your brain makes you sexy, right?
I did a brain health hour with Drew in New York yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and I was talking about one of the symptoms of menopause that people don't realize is increased anxiety, increased depression, which people don't associate being perimenopausal or menopausal. And I said, you know, that there are women who are double the rate of depression, anxiety, and you said, I want to dispute you on that. I want to come up against you on that because I'm seeing a lot of men who are coming in with terrible depression and anxiety. There are a lot of women in this room who have men in their life, right? And so while I do stress all the time that women are 2/3 of the caregivers in this country, 2/3 of those with Alzheimer's, there, as I said originally, there's a lot of men stepping up and a lot of men hiding cognitive issues and brain health issues. What is the best way to talk to a man to get him to talk about anything? I have 2 boys, so
I love that you asked me these questions, given that you have sons.
You said you talking to me about
brothers.
it.
The answer is to give him a microphone and put him on a stage.
He's not shy. Come on.
I love that you're trying to close the gap because I had misperceptions as a trained physician about Alzheimer's disease. I learned from you that more men have it, and that makes me think about
More women have it.
More women have it. It makes me think about my mom, my daughter, and sort of approach how I think about my patients. In terms of getting men to talk, I think we should, just like we're challenging that sort of what causes that gap in Alzheimer's, I think we should challenge what causes that gap in mental health. And I think it's just as men, we're not encouraged to talk about our mental health, our emotional health. We think that talking about the struggles we have that all men, just like all women have, to sort of understand ourselves, to manifest whatever it is we believe we are, that's a human experience. That's not a male or female experience. And so if you want to talk to the men in your life, I recommend you approach them with an open heart without a diagnosis or stigmatizing judgmental words, but much more of how you feel and what's missing. I know that's what means the most to me when my wife talks to me about my mental health, right? I don't feel that you're here. The kids don't feel you're here. Boy, I pay attention right away when I'm getting a request to step up and do my job and that something about my mental health is getting in the way. It causes men, I think, to pay attention because that's what we want to do, right? We want to do our job.
So one of the things we also know that's really bad for the brain is stress, Roberta. And everybody I talk to, whether I'm talking to people, kids who are 25, 28, 30, women who are parenting, providing, working, men, is stress. And everybody tells people, minimize your stress. Which is like, I hate when people say that to me. It's like, like, duh, if I could, I would. But so why is stress so bad in this technological age when everybody's wired up? And what do we know about stress in the brain?
So a little bit of stress actually is beneficial. A lot of stress chronically never is. And you know how you know that? Nobody who's chronically stressed is happy. And they're not fun to be around. Right? Just so you know. And yeah. So part of what I think when we look at what these stress hormones do, they typically shut down systems. And one of the systems that they shut down is brain energy metabolism, right? So producing energy is critical. You're all using, actually, let me just talk about the brain energy system for a little bit. The brain is an energy hog. From here down, we're a Prius. From here up, we're a Hummer. The brain is an energy hog. And then part of that is that we're dependent upon the brain for our survival. So when we have a situation where we're under chronic stress, part of what happens is that the brain's energy system is constantly under stress demand. It's like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. Well, eventually, that actually erodes our ability to actually generate that energy that we need for the brain to do all its, housework, if you will. I want to make mention of, I'm very excited. We now are embarking on a clinical trial of the first therapeutic to regenerate the degenerated brain. Now let me ask you, how many women in this room have given birth? Great. It turns out that during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, you made a lot of this molecule. Interestingly, that molecule is one that helps the brain develop. Right? And that molecule is a daughter of progesterone. It's called allopregnenolone, or ALLO for short, allo. And we finished a phase, an early stage clinical trial and saw very encouraging, not definitive, but encouraging evidence that we can actually regenerate that area of the brain that Wendy was talking about, the hippocampus. So in terms of exciting, opportunities, therapeutics on the horizon, and we demonstrated this in people with early Alzheimer's disease. So early in the stage of Alzheimer's disease. So now we're going into a phase 2, and we'll be starting to recruit for the clinical trial in early spring. So thank you. You're all funding this trial. Thank you so very much through the National Institute on Aging and your tax dollars at work.
Let me ask you, Wendy, one of the things that we talked about, I think in the morning, and then when we were doing the brain health hour the other day, was that, all of you will probably know more than the doctor you're going to after today, honest to God. And it's really important that you come armed with certain things. What would you say, like Richard was talking about, know your cholesterol levels, right? Know your A1C. What would you tell people, and this is important, when they go to their doctor, who will not probably ask you about your cognitive health? I know you heard Pam, took 5 years or whatever to get a diagnosis. What should people know when they go to their doctor?
Yeah, that's a great question.
what I want them to know, but it's hard to get that information to them, is how well their brain is responding to the things they're doing. They might be trying to sleep well. They might be having a wonderful diet. They might be exercising a lot. And in fact, that was a question that people were asking me all the time. I would give these talks about the effects of exercise on the brain and tell them all the studies and tell them about the hippocampus. And they would come up and ask me this devastating question, which was, just tell me the least amount of exercise I had to do to get that. And it was devastating because I couldn't give them the answer. And so what I started working on was a startup company that would allow you to test your brain before and after exercise to be able to tell whether the dance class was giving me a better mood than the brain and butt class that I took this morning, for example. I'm sure they both did wonders for my brain. We're starting in senior living facilities because that's where the pain point is highest, but I would love everybody to be able to know and easily measure what the effect of their different equinox classes are on their brain. How are their brains responding? And what if I really try and go to all the high intensity HIIT classes for a week? What is that effect on my brain? How responsive? I want them to be able to know that and be able to talk to their doctor about that.
But I want them to know when they go into their doctor's office and the doctor says, are you doing exercise? And they go, yeah, but I want them to know, I want you to ask me about my cholesterol. I want you to ask me about my A1C. What are the things you want them to ask? And we have a piece of paper that I believe everybody's getting. We came up with 10 things to ask your doctor so you're armed, whether you're in your 20s or 30s, your 40s, your 50s. Like when I went to my doctor, they never talked to me about being perimenopausal. They never talked to me about starting estrogen when I had symptoms. They never talked to me about the connection between glaucoma, thyroid cancer, dry eye, menopause, anxiety, depression. They didn't talk to me about what was normal for A1C or what was better. So what do people need to know so they can do better than I did? That's the point of this.
Yeah. So I would say that you need to ask them to ask you about what levels of exercise you're doing for your age, for your hormonal level, how your sleep is doing. Sleep is so critical. What can they tell you about the level of sleep and whether you should be improving it with all the sleep hygiene things we know about? What is your diet? Ask me about my diet and how much fat and how much processed foods that I'm eating versus the vegetables and the fruits. And how much social connectedness am I getting? Am I depressed? Am I lonely? I don't think that gets asked in the doctor's office.
So Josh, sleep is such a huge issue for people, and I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I'm on Ambien, I'm addicted to Ambien, or I'm trying all these other things. And we do know that people who have sleep apnea, that's a path to Alzheimer's, right? And so what can people do who are saying, I haven't met a person who isn't saying I'm not stressed or I'm not sleeping. So what should people know about that?
Yeah, I think that we know that apnea and any challenge to our sleep increases our risk for cognitive problems and even Alzheimer's dementia later in life. And we usually start with pretty basic recommendations around what we call sleep hygiene. We begin by saying, what do you do in bed and can you limit those activities? We really should only do 2 things in bed and one of them sleeping.
What's the other thing?
The other one's dreaming.
What is the other thing? I think I'm deficient in the other thing. Come on, Josh.
So we don't want to watch the iPad, be on our phone, even read books in bed because we're training ourselves to be awake when we're in bed. And what we want to do is train ourselves to be asleep when we're in bed. And then, a lot of the other things that we've talked about today, of course, can have direct benefits on our sleep. We sleep better when we exercise. We sleep better when we eat a healthy diet. We should sadly avoid the nightcap, right? That's not a key to healthy sleep. It might make us drowsy, but it's not a key to a healthy good night's sleep. So we want to do everything we can to improve our sleep on our own by incorporating good sleep hygiene as much as we can. And we know that this matters. We know that when we're sleeping, and I think we'll see a Nobel Prize in the next 5 years for the discovery of a system by which when we're sleeping, we clean our brain. And we clean a lot of byproducts of metabolism, and we also clean the protein that accumulates in the plaques of Alzheimer's disease. And so this can be a direct impact on our risk for getting Alzheimer's disease.
So that's really huge, what he just said. When you sleep, your brain cleans itself out. And putting away your devices, one of the other things coming out of that, Drew, when we were talking yesterday with Jim, they were saying that the brain responds to a calm, clean environment. That was one of the first times I had kind of heard that. And he was saying that, when we talk a lot about decluttering, how we are living with our stuff, it's not only the Western diet, it's the Western lifestyle, is directly impacting our brain and our mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think people think I found that super interesting.
Well, think about that moment we all just shared a couple hours earlier. We took a deep breath together, right? And how in some ways that decluttered our minds. Suddenly, we were present, we were here. And that needs to happen for all of us every day. We're in this hashtag too busy, right? How you doing? What, too busy, you too, see you soon. Not sure when, can't keep up. And that's not good for our mental health. It's because our mental health revolves around us forming a connection. And we learned that basic example in medical school. It's structure equals function. So what's the structure of your human brain? It's one of connection. And when we're too cluttered in our lives, we're too busy, we're not fostering the most important connections, whether that's with your sleep, or with your movement, or with the people that you love, with your own self and your intention, with your food. And so the big problem with sort of too much clutter and too much is it feels that we've deprioritized what's most important, which is our brain health and our mental health. Like, that's you. That's like the best part of you. It's the most interesting part of you. And it's the part of you, as we heard, right, that uses the most of our food, that depends the most on our exercise. So it feels the busyness has gotten in the way of our brains, and I think it's time for us all to take our brains back.
Do you think that's why we're seeing increased examples of depression, anxiety, young people reporting record numbers of these diseases?
I think there are a bunch of reasons behind that. I think certainly there's that concern we all have that as we have a disconnected society, what does that mean? Because nothing keeps our brains healthy than our connections. I think that when we don't have a deeper kind of form of communication, I think that certainly increases things. I also think one of the reasons we're seeing an increase is that we're talking about it more. When you say you have depression or anxiety, there's that next step that we expect, that we want you to get help, and that there is lots of help to get. And so I think that's one of the other reasons that we're seeing increases, is that we're talking about it, and that's something that people disclose and something people speak about in public in a way that I just, as a mental health clinician, I just think is wonderful. Because ask me, that idea, what do you want to tell your doctor? I think you need to tell your doctor to look him or her in the eye and say that you really want to take great care of your brain. And the reaction that clinician has right in that moment is going to tell you whether you've got the right partner for that, or whether you need to find another physician. Because you want to be with somebody who's like, I get excited when people come in and they say, I want to build my mental health. I want to have a better brain. I want to have a better mood. I'm thrilled for that, right? Because that's what we're here for.
Jude, go ahead.
Yeah, I might piggyback just because I think that's a great point. And we unfortunately hear stories all the time about people who are worried about their memory and worried about their cognition, and they struggle to find someone who can provide a diagnosis. So sometimes I think you have to go to your doctor with not taking no for an answer. I need to have a workup. I need to understand what's going on in my brain. And sometimes, unfortunately, it means finding a different doctor. I mean, we have a lot of people who come to us who've had the same primary care physician for 40 years, and that may not be the best person to help them with their memory problems. And I am a true believer, firm advocate for early diagnosis of dementia and Alzheimer's disease and memory problems. Even though we don't have the treatments we hope to someday soon have, because this is a challenging road that families are going down, and the most important thing of that early diagnosis is making a plan. And
Who is the best doctor to give you that support for your brain health?
I mean, to paraphrase everything we've heard up here, someone who cares about your brain, I guess. I mean, there are numerous specialists who are equipped to do this, and many primary care docs can certainly do this. We typically recommend you try to see a neurologist, a geriatric psychiatrist, or a geriatrician, but it's not exclusive to those subspecialties. I think that you want someone who has a little training, knows that this is a big issue, and wants to help you understand what's going on, fix something if it can be fixed, and start you down the road of planning if it's something that can't.
So I asked you that, Roberta, because I was saying, I need a better doctor. There's so many times, I ask a doctor a question and they're like, and I have access to the best doctors and really smart doctors to me. So I think the other thing is that a lot of people will say to me, like, well, Alzheimer's doesn't run in my family, so I don't have to be concerned about it, right? I go, no, wrong. Or people say to me, like, I have Alzheimer's in my family, does that mean I'm going to get it? And I go, no, it doesn't. So I think leaving people here with, like, is their OBGYN the right doctor for them? How scared should they be? And what is one thing leaving here today that they can do or tell a friend?
It's interesting. We did a study a number of years ago that was fascinating, and we asked the question, could we identify women at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease when they were still healthy? And what we found is that, in a group of healthy women, there were actually 3 groups. Women who were metabolically, they had their metabolic glucose system under good control, right? And then there was another group of women who were at risk for cardiovascular disease. All these women were healthy. And there was another group of women who were at risk for type 2 diabetes. And what does that mean, at risk? It meant that they were not diagnosed. Everybody was in the healthy range. The problem is that they were on the wrong end of normal, right? So
What does that mean?
So if their glucose, your fasting glucose is supposed to be low, it was on the high side. Their hemoglobin A1C, still in the normal range, high side. Triglycerides, high side, right? The HDL, the good lipid transporter, was on the low side. So it's all in the normal range. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to get your blood chemistries, right? The actual report, and look at the normal range. And it's like, whoa. I'm high, low, and what that really means is that you're in transition from healthy to unhealthy. And what's great about that is that you can move that needle back into a healthy, controlled system. Now, what was also interesting, and I'm sorry, it was like, when we drilled down further in these women who were at risk for metabolic type 2 diabetes and had significant cognitive decline, it was actually all these women were postmenopausal. They were postmenopausal who were at risk for type 2 diabetes and carried the ApoE4 risk gene. And how many of you have heard of the ApoE4 gene, right? So there's a gene that if you have that gene, about 25% of the population has that gene, you are at higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. But here's the rub, right? And those women had significant decline in their cognitive function, but that ApoE4 gene was in all of these different groups, in the 3 groups, equally distributed. So what that means is you can't change being female, chromosomally female. You can't change being postmenopausal. You can't change your age, and you can't change your ApoE genotype. But what you can change is your metabolic health, because that was the driver, combined with this Alzheimer's risk gene. So that only amplifies that this is not a foregone conclusion. Even if you have the risk gene, you can actually modify your risk through health. And the one last thing that I want to say is you can't outsource taking care of you. You can't outsource it. It's up to you.
So what that means, so the idea of outsourcing, I think for many people means they think their doctor knows more than they do. So when your doctor tells you that your A1C is on the normal end, but it's high, what do you do?
So part of that is,
Or your blood pressure is,
Yeah.
quote, normal, but it's high.
yeah. So part of it is that you need to begin to think about what you're doing. I mean, each of the panelists have been talking about what are you doing that's driving that to the high. Are you sleeping? Are you eating a high-fat diet that drives inflammation? That's the big problem with this McDonald's diet. I hate to call it the Western diet. I hope we're better than that. In the Western world, but it's the McDonald's diet. It's the McDonald's diet, and that is a driver of inflammation. It's a driver of inflammation, and so in part, I think we have to start looking at whoa, and coming back to Wendy's idea. I love the app. Imagine, we now have an app where we begin to have, for example, Wendy, Lisa, an app that says, do you really want to have those fries? What's it worth to you? And how well is it going to look on you? It's like, and
But what's it going to do for your brain? I think getting people out of thinking just about what it's going to look like on your thighs, but is it going to impact your brain?
well, let me just tell you, if it doesn't look good on your thighs, it doesn't look good on your brain. Just saying.
Let me just go, and I know we have to wrap it up, but I think one of the big things, certainly out here in California, Drew, we hear a lot about is intermittent fasting, keto diet, and all of that. And that many people in the Alzheimer's space that I've interviewed are talking about intermittent fasting, but intermittent fasting for women looks different than intermittent fasting for men. Keto in men looks different from keto in women. I'm super confused, so I'm not quite sure. So what is the answer?
Well, I want to invoke, instead of just talking, besides the fat in the Western diet, the main issue is the sugar and the simple sugars. When you look at the top 10 foods calorically that Americans consume, they are high carbohydrate desserts, right? And so when we think about things like fasting, what's exciting about that is we're really starting to think about ways that we can feed the brain that's different. And I really encourage people to explore these ideas, right? This is a brain health expert. As we were chatting, he tells me he doesn't eat after 6:30 at night and doesn't eat again until 8 because someone in the lab says autophagy, when the cells sort of clean themselves up, starts after a 16-hour fast. That's, to me, a really exciting application of new science. How does this...
Is that good for 16 hours? I've heard is not good for women.
Well, I think that you can answer that more than I can, but I think part of the issue is figuring out what works for you, in the sense that for some people, ketogenic diets are amazing. Your blood numbers look great. For other people, it's really not great. And it's this notion that I think you're hearing of you should know your numbers, right, from your B12 level to your hemoglobin A1C, because there are biomarkers that you can check that everyone should know, not in their 50s, in their 20s, right? I know I have the ApoE4 gene. I just know it, known it for years. That motivates me and influences my choices, right? It makes it really easy to make the right choice because I want to take care of my brain. And so I think that the idea is really people working on this personalized notion of what works for you, what's sustainable for you, from your budget to your time to your motivation. And that's in some ways the secret sauce, is something that you can activate in your own life to eat more whole foods in the pattern that works for you.
Josh, can you just expand on that intermittent fasting? Because we're hearing, I've interviewed people who say you should fast a whole day, and that's the secret to not getting Alzheimer's.
So, I admit to being skeptical when I first started reading these studies. I thought if you get people to stop eating Taco Bell at midnight, it's good for them. Eureka. But the basic science has really been pretty compelling at this point, that every cell in our body has a clock. Our brain has a clock, it's reset by the sun. Every cell in our body has a clock, and it's reset by when we eat. And evolution has produced our current physiology, and maybe the ability to eat complex carbohydrates any time of the day is not good for us. Ultimately, we need to do studies in humans to really know whether these things can actually prevent Alzheimer's disease or any other health outcome. And I think that the science is coming fast and furious on intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, other dietary habits, much easier dietary approaches like the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, and there are even now some clinical trials to see whether these things can meaningfully reduce risk for Alzheimer's disease. We don't have all the results yet, but this is an area of active study, and I think it holds great promise.
So I think I'm hopeful that you all learned something. I'm hopeful that you will take advantage of these extraordinary professionals who are here. And I think that while you may be reading, this trial has failed and this thing is hopeless, you take away from this today that there's a lot of hope and there are a lot of things you can do starting today. That you're in charge of your own health, you're in charge of the health of people around you, to pay attention if you have parents or loved ones that might be exhibiting signs. You know, we're all able to be, reporters. We're all able to be caregivers. We're all going to be called forth in this disease. I wish I could tell you you're not, but it knows no boundaries. It's twice as likely in people African American, Latina descent. Your companies can adjust the food that they give you. And many of the people come up to me also who have made the difficult decision to put people that they love in memory care centers, and the food that is being served in many of them is terrible. And you pay a lot of money, and you can change that, because people come up to me all the time and say, you need to change the diets, the food that they're serving in memory care centers. I said, why don't you do it? And they're like, oh. I said, you're paying the bill, you can do it. So everybody in here can do something, and I think it's super important. One of the things we didn't talk about today is the incredible cost of this disease, and I would urge people, it's a whole other conversation, but to begin as we approach the holidays, and you might be with your families, talk about with your families, how do they want to age? What do they want? How do they want to be taken care of? Think about it yourself. How do I want to age? What does that look like for me? Have I put aside any money for my aging? Have my parents put aside any savings for aging? Because it unfortunately is going to come down to that. And we're going to work hard to influence government leaders. That's one of the things I want to do on the task force. But until we do that, this is a disease that, is a family disease. And what I learned by having a loved one that got this disease, that it impacts everybody in the family, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, cognitively, everything. So if you've got siblings, talk to them. Get in the habit of conversing with them, making plans, making everybody pay attention. It's something that we all have to think about. I sit down with my kids and say, this is what I want. This is how I want to age. They're like, don't say it. I said, no, I want you to know. I want to talk about it. I'm putting money aside. I want you to understand it. So this is something that we all can do. We all can reach out to people who are older, who are isolated, who don't get invited. And as somebody said to me, I think I mentioned it the other day, that was saying that the United States is one of the only societies that values youth over age. And this is a cultural issue too, kind of honoring people who are older, not leaving them to warehouse, and not being afraid of people who say, I have Alzheimer's. And so I want to thank all of you deeply for having the courage to come to this event. As I said, I know there are no smiling babies here. I know there's no survivors who have Alzheimer's. I know this is a tough issue, but I think it's really the most important issue of our time, and it brings together every part of our lives. So I hope you will think about that when you vote. I hope you will think about that when you go to work. I hope you will think about it when you look at people who are older than you. And I hope you will think about it when you sit down at your tables, whether you're having family dinner, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever. And I think together, I've always said women are at the center of this disease, but I believe we're at the epicenter of changing how our nation deals with it, how our families deal with it, and how our businesses deal with it. So I want to thank all of you so much for coming. You're funding their research, and it's really powerful. Thank you.